up, guys? It's Meg, and it's that time of the week again where we get to talk about the best show on television, AMC's The Walking Dead. Today we're talking about Season 5, Episode 11, called The Distance. What did you guys think of the episode? Probably the best part for me was the Rick and Michonne dynamic that we see in this entire episode. I absolutely love the push and pull we see between these two characters. Michonne sees all the good, the potential for a great community to be a part of. Surely not everyone in this world can be bad at this point. Yes, they've had really bad experiences lately, but surely not everyone is horrible. And Rick, on the other hand, thinks that everyone is a potential threat. He has to do everything in his power to keep safe his entire group, including his two children, and he's not willing to take any chances. And there's a moment where he says to Michonne really wants to go and check out and see that Aaron's telling the truth, see the cars, see that there's proof that he is not lying, and then potentially go to Alexandria, this community that he is talking about. And there's a moment where Rick says to her, "My way is safe, your way is dangerous." And she says back, "Isn't it more dangerous to miss out on a potential home for Judith, a place for her to grow up and be safe?" And now those aren't her exact words, but a summary of what is said. And I've always kind of been rooting for Rick and Michonne here, and while there wasn't any really romantic moments or anything like that, I'm okay with that. I love seeing that clearly no one in the group really agrees fully with Rick's decision to, treat Aaron as a threat. He's acting as if, people are going to come and attack them any moment, like they're under attack. And you can kind of see that everyone's suspicious, but really hopeful that Aaron is telling the truth. And Maggie makes a couple comments on how, if he had wanted to, he could have killed them already. And he didn't, he doesn't have anyone out there with him except for the one person. And it really takes Michonne standing up to Rick and taking charge in this episode and telling him, no, we're going to do this. We're not going to miss this opportunity to find a place where we can be. And nobody else questions her. And everyone, agrees that they want to see if this place is good or not. And I really loved seeing the push and pull between these two, because she's not outright defying him. She's not saying, "No, Rick, you're wrong." But she is making a point that she's not willing to let this opportunity slip past her, and she's not going to let Rick stand in the way of the entire group finding a safe place to be. And you can see Rick struggles with it a little bit. He wants to keep everyone safe. He wants to take precautions and to take security measures. And she lets him. She allows him that. She doesn't question him when he says, "We're going to take a different highway to go out here." He agrees, "Okay, go find the cars. Come back in an hour or I'm going to kill him and come after you guys." He definitely doesn't necessarily believe that she's making the right choice, but he's allowing her to do this. And I think at this point, she was really the only one that could reach him and have him actually listen to her, because he takes everything she says into account. I mean, they're very close, and they have been forming very slowly this bond, where she's kind of his right-hand woman. Is that a phrase? Right-hand man, right-hand woman? You know what I'm saying. They've definitely formed a relationship of trust between the two, and he definitely takes what she has to say into account and listens to her where he might not be willing to listen to someone else. Either way, the group decides to go to this community that Aaron has told them about, but they're doing it at night, which is really truly terrifying. And we knew this scene was coming, where there are a ton of walkers and the car hits a bunch of the walkers, and we see that in the preview, but we don't exactly know how it happens. And now we find out that Rick insists on going on a different highway than the one that Aaron says is actually clear and safe, and he insists on going at night, which is always a lot more dangerous when it comes to walkers, because you can't really see them very well and you can't see how many there are. But Rick is concerned about rolling up to the gates of Alexandria without the protection of night. He wants to be able to make a quick escape if he senses that something is wrong with this place. I really like that Glenn had kind of a defining moment in this episode. Back at the Shirewell Estates, we saw Glenn kind of in a darker place. You know, he was becoming very hardened. He said that he might not have saved the person in the train car back at Terminus if he was the person he is now back then. You know, he wouldn't necessarily stop to save someone because he's got to keep his people safe. He's got to keep himself safe. And he said it doesn't matter because finding a new place doesn't matter because it's all going to be like this as he looks at the walker torsos on the ground. You know, he's definitely in a darker place. He's more hardened by the things that he's seen on the road from coming from the hospital, coming from Terminus to where they're at now. And then in this episode, you know, we have them out in the woods, cornfield. Where the hell were they? I don't know. I saw trees and then there was corn and or wheat or whatever that was. I don't know what it was. It probably wasn't corn. It was wheat. Either way, Aaron he still has his hands tied. He's in bad trouble. There's a walker coming at him. He's having trouble fighting it off. And Glenn has a moment where he looks at Aaron and he starts to leave because, you know, that's exactly what he said he would do. He's not the kind of person anymore that would go and risk his life to save someone that he doesn't know. But he changes his mind there and he makes a choice to save Aaron. And then later in the episode when they're at the water tower, when they've all grouped back together, we see him tell Rick, it does matter. I know what I said before, but it does matter. And he says, you know, they told us where their place is. And he's trying to convince Rick, you know, these are good people. It's okay. Like, this is going to be okay. This is going to be a good place. And it does matter. And I loved that we kind of see him come back to who he was, you know, that he hasn't lost himself entirely, that he's not a completely hardened person. Yes, he's changed, but they can still save people and they can still kind of maintain who they were a little bit. And I just thought it was a great, you know, defining moment for Glenn and his character. And I love that we got to see two new characters in this episode. We not only met Aaron, but we met his partner, Eric. And there was a part there where when the flare went off and they were in the car and Aaron's face, where he knew Eric was in trouble and his face fell. And you could see how he was like, nope, this is over. We're done here. Let me out of the car. Because he was determined to get to Eric and to help him because he knew he was in trouble. And I loved seeing that kind of emotion when they reunited. And you can really tell that they just had this strong, loving relationship, and that's all that matters. And, you know, no one else was in the room at that moment. And then Rick walks in, you know, and he's kind of like, okay, you know, hi, standing here too. I loved it. I'm really excited for the next episode where we get to see probably a lot more characters. I mean, we get to see inside Alexandria and we get to meet all of the people that are living there. And oh my gosh, I love how the group dynamic changes when new characters are introduced. And I'm really excited to see how the group is going to fit into this community where it's almost like things are back to normal, you know? And our group is so hardened and crusty and, you know, surviving out there, barely making it. And then they find this great community, but we'll get into that in my Dead Ahead episode. Before they get to Alexandria though, they're on the road to Alexandria and we get a little tribute to Dale. And I have to tell you, I almost cried. I got really emotional when this happened, but the RV battery, you know, the battery on the RV that they've been driving in to Alexandria dies. And Abraham says, you know, where are we gonna get another battery? And Glenn says, right here. And he shows him and he says, how did you know that? And Glenn doesn't answer, but he tells him, you know, to get in the RV and he's gonna go hook up the battery. And I loved that they just chose to bring it back to Dale a little bit, because you guys know Dale was always one of my favorites. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. But when I first saw the RV, I was like, oh my gosh, there's another RV. You know, you can't help but think of Dale if you've been watching the series since season 1. You can't help but think Dale when you see an RV. And the fact that they have an RV was just awesome. And then the fact that they gave us that little reminder of Dale and it just shows how every character has had an effect on everyone else in the group, whether they're alive or dead still. Dead or alive still, that's what I meant. You know, and Glenn wouldn't know about the battery in there if it hadn't been for Dale. And all of our characters take a little piece of those that they've lost with them And it's just amazing when we get to see hints of that and when we get to see glimpses of our old characters. And then they arrived at the gate to Alexandria. And earlier in the episode, Rick had asked Michonne, what did you hear when you went up to Woodbury, the gates of Woodbury? And she said, nothing. And he said, what did you hear when you went up to Terminus? And she said, nothing. And, you know, basically it was silence. And he says, when we arrive at the gates of Alexandria, I have to make a decision without seeing inside whether or not I want to bring my family into this place. And, you know, Michonne's looking at him, and it's a big decision for Rick, because you have to, just like at Terminus, you have to trust these people, and you don't know what's going to happen. And something really horrible happened at Terminus when they walked in there and they trusted those people. And so for Rick to blindly go into a situation like that again, where he's again risking his daughter's life this time, as well as his son's, it's a terrifying thing to think about. And so when they're pulling up to Alexandria and they zoom in on Rick's eyes, and his eyes are really harsh and almost glaring, you know, and you hear the sounds of the children playing. And I get tingles just thinking about it, because you can see the emotion in his eyes, and his whole face just suddenly relaxes, and there's a sense of relief that comes over him. And he looks at Michonne, and Michonne touches his hand. Be still, my heart. And they get out of the car, and he goes around, and he goes to get Judith, and she rolls over. And I just love that when a baby first rolls over, you know, that's kind of one of the biggest milestones for a baby, is rolling over for the first time. And we don't know if she's rolled over on her own before this time, we don't know, but all we've ever seen her is being held or on her back. We've never seen her roll over. And the fact that she rolled over in the back of the car and looked back at Rick, and he smiled at her and he picked her up, it was like a turning point. I feel like it was almost a metaphor for the turning point, that the group is finally going to have something good happen to them, and that it was just another sign that this is a good place, because it's such a turning point for a child to roll over for the first time, and for her to roll over for the first time and look back at Rick, and it was just like, he knew, he already had the relief of hearing the children playing. She rolls over and he picks her up, and he's just like, it feels right, you know, you can tell that it just feels right. And I really wanted to see inside Alexandria this episode, but we didn't, of course. I knew they weren't going to, but I was a little bit hopeful. All in all, this was a fantastic episode. I'm so excited to see what happens with Alexandria, and to see how our group fits in. You know, they're so used to surviving on their own and fending for themselves. So to kind of fit back into a community where things almost seem normal, I think it's going to be pretty tough for a group. But like I said, we'll talk about that in the Dead Ahead episode coming next. That's my review for this episode, guys. What did you think? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Have a great one. Bye.